Excellent. So I'm thrilled to be back in London. It's been a little while since I've had the opportunity to be in London. They let me out of the country from Seattle, so it's good to get a little bit of a reprieve from the tweets and all that. So I'm glad to be here. Welcome back to our plenary session. Hopefully you had some great experiences and inspiring and opportunities to connect and energize in your breakout sessions and also during the coffee breaks. I am going to, I have the honor of introducing two of our fantastic manager research analysts, Hannah Evans, who is a senior manager research analyst covering UK equities and global equities, and Joe Hemant, who is our global head of equity research at Russell Investments. Now, between the two of them, they have 28 years of experience in manager research. So definitely make sure that you're peppering us with your questions. I have some questions prepared, but make sure that you're also preparing questions on your iPads, and I'll be able to see those and ask them as well, because we have a wealth of experience, a tremendous amount of experience here on stage today to help elucidate and help us see sort of the world of manager research. What is it actually like? What happens behind the scenes? What are the things that never get publicly published, but that these people get to see? And how do we at Russell Investments go from a huge amount of potential strategies that we could use and put into clients' portfolios? How do we winnow that down to truly just the best-in-class managers? So before we dive into what is going to be a passion-filled conversation around manager research, I'd love to ask Hannah and Joe, both of you, if you weren't doing manager research today, just hypothetically, what might you be doing instead? Like if you were allowed to choose another passion, what would that be? Maybe Hannah, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, goodness. So what would I be doing? Well, I actually love what I do, and I love doing it at Russell Investments. I don't really have an alternative career plan I have to mind. I mean, outside of manager research, I mean, I love running. I've got 4 very small children, so I think I'd spend more time with them.
And running a lot after them, it sounds like. Excellent. How about you, Joe?
Well, thanks for the extra 30 seconds to think of an answer. I trained as an engineer. I was good at destructive testing, didn't master non-destructive testing, so it's good that I'm a manager research analyst. I don't break anybody too badly. I like climbing mountains. I like listening to Test Match Special. But I'm kind of like Hannah. I like what I do, so I don't have a second career in mind.
Well, we're thrilled that you have chosen manager research, and you've chosen to do it at Russell, especially if you're so passionate about it. And maybe to get us started, Joe, you have 16 years of experience working in manager research. I'm curious, with the benefit of that hindsight and all of that experience, where do you feel is the greatest value of manager research to clients, especially in today's environment?
I mean, I would start with complexity. I mean, we work with Russell clients, we work with Russell portfolio managers. What we research is hugely complex. It's become more complex over the course of my career. There are more strategies, more asset classes, more markets, more market-moving tweets, as you alluded to earlier. So it's helping people navigate that complexity that fires me up. Performance of manager selection is it's integral to the value that Russell can bring to you as clients. And I think the last thing I'd say is, we're in a low return environment. Sometimes it doesn't feel like that from a volatility perspective, but if you're dealing with, as you know, in the US, 10,000 baby boomers, non-pejorative, baby boomers retiring every day, then we're funding pensions today, not saving for the future so much. And so closing that performance gap in a low return environment is going to be really difficult. So that value that we bring as research analysts, helping people identify strategies that they can include in their portfolios that are going to deliver excess return. That's really the value that we bring.
Yeah, and that sounds inspiring and also very powerful. Hannah, I'm curious from your vantage point, you're obviously meeting with money managers every day and get that insight and that sort of firsthand touch there. What's your process when you're researching a manager? How do you get from a huge amount of managers to, oh, this is the one that I want to use in the portfolio?
Okay, so I'm sure it won't surprise you, Sophie, we have a very detailed, robust analytical framework that we use when we do our manager research. We don't go from 14,000 managers to 250 high-ranked managers without being organized and having a robust approach to it. But the best way for me to describe this today is using something we call the 4 Ps: process, people, performance, and portfolios. What differentiates the way we do this, I think, is the fact that we don't start with performance.
Oh, interesting. Huh. Because that's where a lot of other people would tend to start. So where do we start instead?
So we start with the people and we start with the process. That's what really drives our research agenda. So we want the people we invest with to be really passionate about what they do. One of my favorite UK equity managers, for example, has actually written a book about the way he invests. He really believes that his way is absolutely the best way to invest, and that's what we want from our managers. We want our investors to also be aligned and incentivized with us, with our clients. And the reason this is also important to us is because by understanding this, we can understand the behaviors of our portfolio managers. And when we understand this, we can have better conviction in the alpha they're going to generate in the forward-looking environment.
Interesting. So I like that idea of starting with the people and the process. At the same time, I know you mentioned 4 Ps, and I imagine it being Russell Investments, we love all of our children, all of our Ps equally. Joe, how do the other two, the sort of portfolio and performance, come into that process? If we've started with people and process, how do we bleed the other two in as well?
I read the book. Performance and portfolios are basically data, and we use data to test our assumptions, test the validity of our qualitative judgments, and that's vitally important. It's a check on our imaginations. Sometimes mine runs wild, but we thought we'd do a little audience interaction, a little audience participation, check that you're all awake as we warm you up for Tim Peake. So we've got a little question we'd like you to answer on your pads. Oh. There you go. So this is a very brief reconstruction of really the first mass participation experiment that was conducted. 41,000 participants took part. And a very famous interviewer, Robin Day, was asked to record 2 interviews, lie consistently in one, tell the truth in the other. And the transcript was published in the newspaper, the audio was broadcast over the radio, and the television interview was presented. So which media do you think gives you the best chance of detecting deception? You've got a few seconds to answer. Okay, so the majority of you think basically that we're good at reading visual cues. And the answer is unfortunately not. It's actually radio that gives you the best chance of detecting deception. So again, this is just a fun way of showing that you shouldn't rely necessarily on your perceptions, and that you should test and re-examine your assumptions.
Well, and speaking of books, Malcolm Gladwell actually has just published an entire book about that. So
yeah. Another
book to add to our book list.
And I must say at this juncture, it wasn't broadcast on Radio 4, it was actually Radio 1, so there's no advantage gained there. Another way in which we use data is to make our actual decisions more effective, more timely. So a good example of that is a real live manager example. We have a value manager that we follow in New York. A value manager chooses stocks based on price. The narrative of our conversations with the manager, we speak to them quarterly, we visit them on site once a year, started to lean towards talking about growth stocks, about technology investments. And that sort of triggered some concerns in our minds. We like managers to play a role. And so we looked at the portfolios. We found that actually the portfolios had started to reflect these biases, that growth stocks, things like Apple and Google, were appearing in the portfolio. We didn't stop there. We looked at how well those picks had performed. It's been a great environment for growth investing. Technology stocks have done very well. So the portfolio had performed well, but it performed well because he had the allocation, not because of the stocks that he picked. And so actually, ultimately, we took the decision to downgrade the manager from a higher rank to a retained rank.
Well, so that's a really powerful use of data in terms of being able to identify when we have style drift in a manager, which can be problematic because obviously we're typically hiring a manager for a very specific mandate, and if they start to bleed into somebody else's mandate, suddenly we've doubled our growth exposure unintentionally, and
that's true.
Not what we were intending to have happen. Hannah, could you maybe talk about how does data and the fact that we have all of this data on managers help us be able to identify, for instance, early life cycle managers? Do you have any examples of that?
Yeah, sure. So actually there's a global equity manager recently that we put a higher rank on, and we actually were able to work really quickly on this. So just take the story back to the beginning. This portfolio manager worked at a large corporate investment firm and decided to set up his own boutique. Now, using the data we have at Russell Investments, we were able to use his historic portfolios and his historic performance and bolt this together with his current portfolio and current performance to have a real deep understanding of any differences or the things that were being continuous in the way he was approaching investing. This meant we could really focus our research on these marginal changes and allowed us to build up conviction really very quickly. And once we had built this conviction up, we were able to put a higher rank on this strategy, as I said. And this meant that Russell clients were able to access this manager at a point in this firm's life cycle where he's really hyper motivated to generate a great track record. It's worked really successfully so far. And the benefit being that for us is that we just don't need to wait 3 years for a track record because we can use this data to validate what we believe.
Huh. That's interesting, a really thoughtful process and a great way that we can give access to our clients, to managers, as you say, while they're still very hungry, right? They're sort of, it's the difference between make or break for them at that point. I wonder, Joe, again, sort of, you've worked elsewhere before. When you're at Russell Investments doing manager research here, how is that different than doing manager research at, say, your previous employer? Not trying to knock any previous employers, because I'm sure they're all worthy competitors, but...
I'm loyal and monogamous now. I mean, I think the first observation I'd make is that, I'm 21 years as an analyst, and I don't really have a desire to be anything other than an analyst. I've said this before, I have the best job at Russell. I think Russell is a great place to work because it allows you to be a career analyst. I can have an enduring and successful career as an analyst without having to become a portfolio manager or a salesperson, with no disrespect to salespeople or portfolio managers. So I think that's kind of the first thing I'd say. We professionalized research, manager research at Russell. Our first manager meetings were in 1969 for a client called J.C. Penney. I wasn't present at that meeting, but that sort of evolution of our process has continued since then, and it's quite an entrepreneurial place to work as well. The other things I'd say are, it's a broad team that's embedded with portfolio managers who also have experience, and we work together in the markets that we research for the benefit of clients. And really, that's kind of the key piece. Our research is proprietary. We don't check boxes and populate lists and databases that are then sold. It's It's bespoke. It's solely for the use of Russell PMs and Russell clients. It's proprietary.
That's great. Hannah, from your perspective, what are some of the differences of working at Russell Investments and having Russell Investments on your business card when you're speaking to managers?
Yeah, I mean, I echo Joe's point about the career analyst. The value put on manager research at Russell makes it a really appealing place to work. But for me personally, one of the best things about working at Russell is the access that I'm able to get. So that's access to portfolio managers, that's access to all the key investment decision-making people who are going to drive the product's performance. We don't get to meet with them once, we get to meet with them as many times as we need to build this conviction.
That's great. I know in conversations as we were talking about manager research and what you're really passionate about, you talked a lot about the access. You also mentioned that breadth is something that has been really key for you and very helpful as an analyst.
Yeah, so breadth, there's two very easy ways for me to describe how we get this at Russell. One is we look at the full opportunity set. So I'm based in London, but I don't look at global managers just in London. I look at global managers around the world. So I'm really able to pick the best in class. Another way we get the depth that we have here is within the research team itself, we have a lot of specialization. So this really helps us to drill deep into what we're looking for. I think one other point worth mentioning on this is we also sometimes undertake mini or not so mini projects, and as luck would have it, I have an example at the minute, one I'm going to actually present on tomorrow internally, and it's looking at research platforms at investment management firms. So I did a trip about 6 weeks ago, and off the back of that, something we were discussing was how impactful these research teams are for the people running the money. So this is companies like Wellington, T. Rowe Price, Fidelity, AllianceBernstein, Bailey Gifford. And what I've done since is we've got the data, and I've literally gone analyst by analyst to look at how much experience they have, how much tenure, how long they've been in the role. So to really understand what these research platforms are offering. And by doing this across the board, it gives me something to compare and contrast against, which then I'm able to take into account when I'm considering what I think these managers are going to deliver for us.
That sounds really interesting.
I mean, Hannah's somewhat underselling and being a little bit modest the scale of this task. I mean, if you think about the fact that T. Rowe Price has around 150 research analysts globally, Wellington, AllianceBernstein, Bailey Gifford, Capital, Fidelity, MFS, they all have similar sized platforms, and we're really trying to dig deep and understand the quality of those platforms, how they interact with portfolio managers over time as well as at a single data point. And it has benefit not just to Hannah but to myself and to the other research analysts around the globe that work at Russell.
Well, and I can imagine that lends a tremendous amount of perspective, right?
Yeah.
Would you comment on that?
Yeah, no, I mean, we cover at least 2,000 meetings a year, and as we've mentioned, we've been doing this for a very, very long time. So we have a lot of analysis that we've worked really hard to produce. Now, all this analysis is stored on our proprietary database, which we call Radar.
Love the Russell Investments acronyms.
Yeah, there's loads of them. And this allows us to really get great perspective. And I think a really good example of this is what we call the AllianceBernstein family tree. So going back 20 years, we used to research something called Alliance Capital, and we used to research something called Bernstein. A few years down the line, these two got married.
And wait, they had babies?
They had lots of babies, more than 4 even. And we look at all of these new companies that have sprung out of AllianceBernstein, and the data we have allows us to understand these new companies' heritage. And what this allows us to do is really understand their philosophy and why they've taken the approach that they're taking. And just to put this into real life, so for example, in New York, we've got Sanders and Pizzino, who we are currently funded, and then we've also got Alfinity and Harbour in Australia and New Zealand. So, I mean, we really do get the perspective, not just around the globe, but across time as well.
And those were, so Pizzina and Sanders and stuff, they were previously AllianceBernstein
Yeah.
portfolio managers. So they were the offspring.
Exactly that.
I love
Yeah.
that family tree concept, and I can see how that power of having that sort of context and history and track record can be really helpful in identifying. Joe, if you can maybe for a second indulge us and take off your manager research hat for just a second. I know.
Just the hat.
Just the hat. Yeah. Keep the socks, please. Are they a requirement for manager research excellence?
Personality is important.
Personality is important, exactly.
You need to build rapport with a manager to get to
Okay.
know them, to really understand what they think.
Excellent. So, that was one of the questions that we got. I think Bob Folks had a question about your socks. So you guys might want to take it off stage too. Find out where you got the pink socks from. But with that in mind, if you take off your manager research hat for a minute and put on your, head of global equity manager research hat, what is the governance process? Talk to us about the governance process around manager research at Russell Investments.
Yeah, so the research team has an independent governance structure, so it sits outside of portfolio management. And the purpose of that is to try and enforce independence. Only senior analysts are rank owners, so they're the only people who can assign a higher rank. Senior because they're the people who've acquired the market experience. They've seen multiple different types of managers in different types of market environment. Something that was said to me when I first started was, every one of the first 150 managers you meet is going to be a higher rank because every single person you're going to meet is going to be intelligent. They're going to have lots to say. Some of them have got some great tricks up their sleeve. And it's not until you've got that perspective that you can start to triage between the best in class and the merely good. And we are looking for those best in class managers. The second aspect of our sort of governance structure is we have a peer review process. It's called a sounding board at Russell, and that's where other senior analysts, other portfolio managers, and other interested people within the investment division get together and review the quantum of research that we've built to that point in time, and we're really reviewing the investment case. There's a lot of passionate people about research, people who are passionate about research at Russell, and so we're our own toughest critics a lot of the time, and those can be quite adversarial conversations, but in a polite, non-destructive testing way. The last thing I should say is that there's a second sort of independent wall of defense, if you like, and that's the operational due diligence team. They sit outside the investment division, and they independently visit with managers to review compliance documentation, trading policies, technology failover plans, and they have real teeth in terms of how we access manager excess return. And the governance structure is designed to protect and preserve the excess return that we're trying to generate through manager selection.
Actually, here, this ties in well with a question that I've received from the audience. So if you have questions, we are receiving them. The technology is working in this room. The question is, if your process would have avoided Neil Woodford, should the industry whistleblower sort of have been blowed to the regulator? So to me, that sort of ties in with how do we protect our clients? Would we have maybe detected something like a Neil Woodford, or say, roll the clock back a few years to Madoff? How does our process guard against us, having clients exposed to those sorts of cases?
Okay. Hopefully nobody's got an open legal process going here, but.
We're not providing advice.
Yeah. One of the first things we do, and Hannah alluded to this before, is we collect data. So we don't start with portfolios and performance from an assessment perspective, but we do start from the perspective of collecting the data. So we won't typically meet with a manager until we have portfolios, until we have holdings, and we have performance. And that allows us to make direct comparisons between what a manager describes they do, and we send them a questionnaire, ask them to describe their investment process, what they say they do when we meet them. We can observe what's in their portfolio. And I think the thing with Woodford is, and the real disappointment, the indictment of poor manager selection here is that the flags were there in the portfolio. And you would have been able to observe the shift in character, the shift in behavior from a man who was largely focused on income generation and sort of essentially blue chip companies in his time at Invesco to something different at Woodford. Madoff's a bit different because that was a fraud. Fraud's harder to detect. I think the insurance, if you like, from a Russell perspective there is that with the advent of things like efficient portfolio implementation, which is our mode of collecting a model portfolio and implementing it ourselves, we never give custody of assets to someone else anyway. Madoff was a fraud. He took people's money and
absconded with it.
Indeed, yeah.
Yes. Okay.
No polite way of saying that, really.
Yeah, even in polite society. Hannah, I'm curious for you, one of the questions that's come in is if radio is the best way to detect sort of deception, then why do we go to such great lengths to meet managers in person? And I know that sometimes we have more than one analyst go and meet people in person. And also, how do we avoid, as we're getting to know them very well, how do we avoid giving preferential treatment or sort of getting too close to a manager? What are your processes to avoid some of that?
So one of the reasons we often go with a colleague, as you said, so quite often when we go to these meetings, there'll be 2 or 3 of us there, and that allows you to make sure you've got a sense check. I thought this, what did you think? Then to Joe's point, the data also, so you might think this looks a bit strange, I don't understand why he's invested in these stocks, and then you can actually look at the data and you go, oh, actually, it does make sense, or if it doesn't, you can look into it further. So that's one way to make sure. And in terms of the point about radio, so we do conference calls as well, just to cover that off, but there's also a very real skill, and it's very hard to do this just over the phone, we're creating partnerships with the managers who want to invest in. We are trying, whilst we do try to detect deception, that's not the goal. We're not going out there to try and trick our managers. We're trying to create an understanding of what they do. We want to know what they're really good at. Sometimes we're going to go to a manager and say, do you know what, this is part of your portfolio, it's exceptional. Like, it's not always about trying to look for a negative. And to create that sort of understanding and partnership with investors, meeting them face to face is really important.
Were you going to add something, Joe?
I was just thinking.
You looked like you wanted to jump in.
Well, the second part of the question referenced falling in love with people, right?
It didn't quite say that. It said if you favored the manager, how would you avoid that clouding your judgment? But
yeah.
Sure, we can go down the love route if you'd rather.
Well, I was just going to say, like, many of you will have met a large number of investment managers. Not many of them are actually that likable, so...
let alone lovable.
Let alone lovable.
We're on safe ground.
Present portfolio management company excluded. No, I think, we're ultimately, that's the utility of data. So.
Okay, excellent. What about, so you guys have both mentioned the word trick, right? You said that sometimes portfolio managers have tricks up their sleeve. Hannah mentioned we're not trying to trick the managers into anything when we're interviewing them. Could you give us an example about sort of tricks that portfolio managers sometimes try to pull? I mean, aside from sort of the Madoff, sort of those extremes and stuff, but what are some things that can be hard to detect or that we guard against?
Yeah, sure. This is a good one. This is a current one. So we've a new analyst who joined Russell very recently. He's not here, so he can't take offence at this story. He and I did a research meeting recently together, And he came out and I asked him what did he think, and you should always ask a younger person what they think before you tell them what you think. And he said, I thought it was really interesting. He had lots to say about the environment, about the impact of macro on the decision making, and he was fantastic at navigating through Bloomberg to give us examples. And I said, that's really interesting. So how does that relate to the investment philosophy, the investment process? And he was stumped. And I said, well, basically what you've fallen for is the classic conjurer's trick, right? It's distract you with dazzling market insight over here, it's distract you with technology and Bloomberg finesse over here, and you've missed the fact that actually none of this relates to the investment process. So there are lots of things that can happen in a meeting that are not constructive. Again, that's why we go back and we test our hypothesis. We triangulate between multiple people and multiple meetings over time.
And when this is another question from the audience, when we're getting feedback from portfolio managers, and maybe we're making a decision to change their status and rank, how transparent are we with them about that? Do we tell them when they're changing ranks?
So I got an example literally from yesterday where we did decide to downgrade a manager, and I did ring them up and give them some feedback. We obviously don't give away our IP. We are very professional, but as I said, there are relationships, and actually it's a good example because it was a really interesting conversation because I said to them, I actually said to her, I said, look, I'm just going to tell you how it is because obviously no one ever wants to hear that, but these are the reasons why, and she actually agreed with me. She's like, you're absolutely right on these points. So.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Impressive. Well, that's interesting. Last question. Joe, we've just talked a lot about what we're doing today, what we've just done yesterday. We have 50 years of experience. You weren't at the JCPenney meeting, but we all know that it happened. It's in Russell Investments lore. Looking 50 years ahead, right? We don't sort of rest on our laurels at Russell Investments. We're always trying to keep ahead of what do clients need from us, what are money managers doing, how are capital markets changing. 50 years from now, if we were sitting here having this conversation with our walkers, what would our conversation look like that would be different? I mean, how would we be talking about manager research different? How will that function look?
I think we wouldn't have to worry so much about the technology. The audience would probably all be chipped. No, I think the relentless and acute focus on performance is going to persist. I think that's the first thing to say. Right now, managers are scrambling to adapt to external pressure to incorporate ESG risk and return drivers in their process. It's something that we've been following for over 5 years now, but whether that's client-led or campaign-led or led by legal requirement, managers are really scrabbling to incorporate ESG, trying to figure out how that impacts on security returns, and I think they will be for a good 10 years to come. I think the third thing is sort of potentially been a theme through my answers anyway, and Hannah's too, is the use of data, the data that we collect, the way we treat that data, pool it, the tools we use to analyze it. I think that will be, excuse me, the biggest story of at least the next decade.
Terrific. Well, thank you both very much, Hannah and Joe. I know you guys have a lot to scurry back to the office too, a lot of conference calls, hopefully not too many downgrades, hopefully some more positive news for money managers today. But thank you very much on behalf of all of us at Russell Investments and also on behalf of our clients for all of the hard work you do on the money manager research side. Thank you.
Thank you.